I was the kind of girl who never seemed to fit in at school. I walked through the hallways with my head down, trying my best not to draw attention to myself. Back then, I wasn't the kind of girl who people noticed for being pretty or popular. Instead, I was the one everyone called the ugly girl. My hair was wild and untamed, always frizzy, no matter how many products I used to try and tame it. I wore thick glasses that slipped down my nose and made me feel like everyone could see me as some kind of nerd. I also had braces, the kind that made me feel like my smile was a joke. I didn't wear the latest clothes either. My outfits were simple, usually not something you'd see in the latest fashion magazines. Everything about me felt wrong, and I couldn't hide it. At lunch, I would sit by myself at the back of the cafeteria. I didn't want to draw attention, so it was easier to just stay away from everyone else. The whispers didn't stop, though. Every now and then, I'd hear someone laugh as they looked my way. It wasn't the kind of laugh that made me feel included, but the kind that made me wish I could shrink into the walls and disappear. There was always someone who would say something mean about me, making sure they were loud enough for me to hear. "Did you see her hair today? It's like a bird's nest. Why does she even bother trying to smile? It's so awkward. Ugh, her glasses make her look like a grandma." The words stung every time. It didn't matter if they weren't said to my face. I could always tell when they were talking about me. They'd look at me and then turn away, like they were just waiting for me to catch on. The laughing, the teasing, the looks, it made me feel like I didn't belong. It made me feel like I was invisible, but in the worst possible way. I tried to avoid these moments, but they were everywhere. Even in gym class, when we were picked for teams, I was usually the last one chosen. I wasn't athletic, and I wasn't cool enough to be picked first. I'd smile awkwardly and try to pretend like it didn't bother me. But deep down, it did. I wanted so badly to be like the other girls. Pretty, confident, and always surrounded by friends. But it felt like that wasn't going to happen for me. I started to believe what everyone said about me, that I wasn't good enough, that I was the ugly girl who would never get noticed for anything good. There was one girl in particular who was the ringleader of the teasing. Her name was Sarah. She always seemed to have something to say about me, whether it was my appearance or the way I walked or talked. It was like she took joy in making me feel small. She had this group of friends who followed her lead, laughing whenever she said something mean about me. At first, I tried to ignore them. But as time went on, it got harder and harder to pretend like it didn't hurt. Every day felt like a battle to keep my chin up and not let the words get to me. Sometimes I would lie in bed at night, staring up at the ceiling, wishing I could wake up and be someone else. Someone who wasn't the target of jokes and whispers. I thought maybe things would get better when I got older, but deep down, I didn't really believe that. I didn't think I'd ever be the girl everyone wanted to be friends with. After all, how could someone like me ever be enough? It felt like every day was the same. The teasing, the whispers, the awkward silences. Nothing ever seemed to change. High school was a place where I felt invisible, not in the way where no one saw me, but in the way that people only saw the things they didn't like. I was the girl who didn't belong. And it seemed like that was my story. Just another chapter of rejection. But then, something happened that I never expected. It started on a regular Monday morning. I was sitting in the back of my English class, staring out the window, when Ms. Evans, our teacher, walked in. She was kind and always seemed to notice the things other teachers didn't. She gave me a smile. But it wasn't the kind of smile that made me feel awkward. It was a kind one, a real one. I had never really spoken much in class, and I certainly didn't raise my hand to answer questions like the others did. I was just there, quietly doing my work, keeping my head down. But this day was different. Ms. Evans called on me, and for a moment, I froze. The whole class turned to look at me, and I could feel the familiar heat rising in my face. I was sure they were all just waiting for me to mess up, to stumble over my words. But Ms. Evans didn't let that happen. Instead of expecting me to give the perfect answer, she encouraged me. "Take your time," she said. "What do you think?" I remember taking a deep breath, and somehow, the words just came out. They weren't perfect, and they weren't the most brilliant answer, but Ms. Evans nodded as though I had just said something incredible, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered. She didn't make fun of me. She didn't treat me like I was invisible. In fact, she asked me to stay after class. I was nervous, unsure of why she wanted to talk to me. Maybe she wanted to tell me I needed to participate more, or that my answer wasn't good enough. But when the bell rang, she asked me to stay. "I see something in you," she said. "You have a lot of potential. You should join the creative writing club. I think you'd be great at it." I was stunned. Me, good at writing? It didn't make sense. I wasn't the popular girl. I wasn't the one people went to for advice or comfort. But Ms. Evans seemed so sure. "Trust me," she added. "You have a voice, and it deserves to be heard." I didn't know what to say. I had never considered myself a writer. My notebooks were full of random thoughts and scribbles, none of which I thought were worth sharing. But there was something about the way she said it, something that made me feel like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. That afternoon, I walked home with my head a little higher. I didn't know what it meant yet, but for the first time, I felt like someone believed in me. Maybe I could do this. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more to me than what everyone else saw. The next day, I decided to take a chance. I showed up to the Creative Writing Club meeting after school. My hands were shaking as I walked through the door, unsure of what to expect. There were a few other students there, all more confident than me. But Ms. Evans greeted me with a warm smile, and that made everything seem less scary. I joined the group, and slowly, I started to feel like maybe I could belong somewhere after all. I started writing, not for anyone else, but for me. It wasn't much at first, just short stories, poems, little bits of my thoughts. But as time passed, I began to find my voice. It was a small spark of hope, but it was enough to change everything. Over time, I began to feel different. It wasn't just about the Creative Writing Club or the new stories I was writing. It was something bigger. My whole life, I had felt invisible, like I didn't matter. But now, I was starting to believe that maybe I did. For the first time in high school, I felt like I had a place where I truly belonged. It wasn't easy. The whispers still followed me in the halls, and I still didn't fit in with the cool crowd. But the more I wrote, the more I learned about myself. I started to see a version of me that wasn't tied to the ugly girl image I had been carrying around for so long. It was like something was changing inside me, even if the outside world hadn't noticed yet. One thing that really surprised me was how my body began to change. It wasn't something I expected, and it definitely wasn't something I planned. My hair, which had always been wild and frizzy, started to calm down a bit. It wasn't perfect, but it was smoother, easier to manage. I started experimenting with different hair products and hairstyles, and slowly, I figured out what worked best for me. The braces were gone too, and although my smile still felt a little awkward, it felt better. I wasn't constantly worrying about metal brackets and rubber bands. I could smile more freely, even if I didn't always feel completely confident. With every little change, I began to feel more like myself, more like someone who didn't need to hide in the background anymore. I also started paying more attention to the way I dressed. I didn't have the money to buy all the latest trends, but I began to find pieces of clothing that made me feel good. Simple things like wearing a nice jacket or finding a pair of jeans that actually fit me made a big difference. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about feeling comfortable in my own skin. For the first time in a long while, I was starting to feel like I mattered, like I could be someone people would notice in a good way. But it wasn't just my appearance that was changing. My confidence grew too. I began speaking up more in class, raising my hand even when my heart raced in my chest. I found the courage to share my writing with the group, even though it terrified me. I was still the quiet, shy girl, but I was learning to embrace my voice. There was one moment in particular that stuck with me. I had written a poem about how I felt like I didn't fit in, how I always felt like an outsider. It was raw, emotional, and the words just poured out of me. I wasn't sure if it was any good, but I decided to share it with the writing club. When I finished reading it aloud, I looked up, expecting the usual awkward silence. Instead, I saw nods and smiles. One girl even said, "That was beautiful. You really have a way with words." It was the first time anyone had ever said something so kind to me. I couldn't believe it. All these years, I had thought of myself as the girl no one wanted to talk to, the girl no one cared about. But here I was, sharing something deeply personal, and people were listening. They were even impressed. For the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had something valuable to offer. I was still far from being the most confident or the most popular girl in school, but I wasn't the same ugly girl anymore. I had begun to discover a new world, one where I didn't have to hide. I had started to see myself differently, and that was the most important change of all. It was the summer after graduation when I started working at a small coffee shop in town. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it was something to keep me busy while I figured out what came next. Honestly, I didn't have a clear plan for the future. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward. High school was behind me. And now, it was time to take a deep breath and look ahead. One quiet afternoon, a woman walked into the coffee shop. She was tall, with long, dark hair and an elegant style that made her stand out. She had the kind of confidence that seemed effortless, and I couldn't help but notice how she carried herself. She ordered a cappuccino and sat down at one of the tables near the window, pulling out her laptop. I was wiping down the counter when she looked up and caught my eye. I quickly turned away, feeling awkward, but then she smiled. It wasn't just a polite smile, it was genuine, as if she actually saw me. She gestured for me to come over, and my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't used to people like her noticing me. "Hey," she said as I approached. "How's your day going?" It's going fine," I said, trying not to sound nervous. "How about you?" She smiled again, and for some reason, her warmth put me at ease. We talked for a few minutes about the weather, the coffee shop, and small things like that. But then, out of nowhere, she said something that caught me off guard. "You know, you've got a really interesting look," she said, her voice calm and thoughtful. "You've got that unique face, the kind people would want to see in magazines." I laughed, thinking she was joking. After all, no one had ever said anything like that to me before. I had always been the girl who hid behind her glasses and felt invisible in a crowd. No one had ever looked at me and seen something special, at least not in the way she was suggesting. "You're serious, right?" I asked, still unsure whether she was just being nice or if she actually meant it. "Totally serious," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Listen, I work with a modeling agency, and I've seen a lot of faces. Yours stands out in a good way. You should think about modeling. I'm not saying you have to drop everything right now, but you've definitely got something." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Me? A model? I had always been the ugly girl, the one who didn't even get picked for the school play, let alone considered for anything glamorous like modeling. My heart was racing, and part of me wanted to laugh at the idea. But there was something about the way she spoke, so confidently and without a hint of doubt, that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was right. Thank you," I said, trying to hide my disbelief. "But I don't know anything about modeling." "That's okay," she said with a smile. "We can teach you. I think you've got the raw potential. You just need to be willing to try. If you're interested, let me know. I can set up a meeting with an agent." I didn't know what to think. Was this really happening? Or was it just a kind gesture from someone who didn't understand how out of reach something like that seemed for me? I didn't know the answer, but I decided to take her up on her offer. What did I have to lose? A week later, I found myself sitting in a small office, nervously waiting for the agent to arrive. My mind was racing with questions. What if I wasn't good enough? What if they laughed at me for even trying? But then I remembered what the woman had said. She believed in me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough to push me forward. The agent arrived, and after a brief chat and a few photos, I walked out of that office feeling a mix of excitement and fear. I had no idea where this path would lead, but I was about to take my first step into a world I had never imagined. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance I had been waiting for. I remember the first test shoot like it was yesterday. After meeting with the agent, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was filled with a nervous energy. I had always thought the world of modeling was something for the perfect people, the ones who had it all together, beautiful, confident, and fearless. I wasn't any of those things, but somehow, this woman had seen something in me. It was hard to believe, but I was determined to at least try. The day of the shoot, I woke up early, feeling both excited and terrified. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection. I was still the same girl I had always been, awkward, unsure, and a little self-conscious. But I wasn't about to back out now. I had come this far, and maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment that changed everything. When I arrived at the studio, I was surprised by how professional everything felt. There were cameras, lights, and people buzzing around, all focused on creating the perfect shot. The photographer greeted me with a warm smile, which helped calm my nerves a little. "Don't worry," he said, "we're just going to have some fun with this." I tried to relax, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking, what if I'm not good enough? What if they don't like me? I couldn't help it. It was hard to believe that someone like me could be on the other side of the camera, being the one people looked at. The first few shots felt awkward. I didn't know how to pose, where to look, or what to do with my hands. Every time the photographer clicked the shutter, I felt like I was doing something wrong. But the team was supportive, encouraging me to try different angles, smile, and be natural. They kept saying, "You're doing great," but I wasn't convinced. I thought I looked stiff and unnatural, but I kept pushing myself to keep going. Then, something strange happened. After a few more shots, I started to feel a little more comfortable. I began to understand what they wanted from me, and I stopped thinking so much about how awkward I felt. I focused on the camera, on the idea of creating something beautiful, rather than on myself. With every click of the camera, I felt like I was becoming a little more confident. It was as if a switch had flipped, and for the first time, I saw myself in a new way. When the photographer showed me some of the pictures, I was shocked. I looked different. I didn't look like the ugly girl I had always seen in the mirror. I looked strong, confident, and even a little beautiful. I couldn't believe it. Those photos captured something in me that I had never seen before, a side of myself that had been hidden for so long. After the shoot, I went home feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me was still scared, wondering if this was just a fluke, but another part of me felt something else. Hope. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe, just maybe, I could do this. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I didn't get booked for every job, but the more I worked, the more comfortable I became in front of the camera. I was learning how to present myself, how to move, and how to feel confident, even when I was still struggling with self-doubt. Each small victory pushed me to keep going, to try harder, to believe in myself just a little bit more. There were still moments of doubt, moments where I felt like I wasn't good enough. But every time I looked at those first photos, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I had taken the first steps toward change, and even though the journey ahead was uncertain, I was ready to keep going. As the months went by, my world started to shift in ways I never thought possible. Modeling was no longer just a dream or a crazy idea. It was becoming my reality. I wasn't booking big campaigns or walking in runway shows yet, but I was getting jobs, and that alone felt like a huge accomplishment. Every shoot, every gig, was another step towards something bigger. And with each job, I began to see myself differently. The first few jobs were nerve-wracking. I remember being so anxious before every shoot. I would worry if my poses looked awkward or if I was being judged. The old insecurities still crept in, reminding me of the ugly girl I used to be. But there was something new too. This feeling that maybe I could do this. Maybe, just maybe, I was good enough. One of my first bigger jobs was for a small fashion brand. I was nervous, but when I stepped onto the set, something clicked. The team was kind and supportive, and they guided me every step of the way. The photographer made me feel at ease, giving me tips on how to pose and telling me to relax. "Just be yourself," he said. "Trust the process." I took a deep breath and tried to let go of my nerves. The more I let myself enjoy the moment, the more natural the photos seemed to become. For the first time, I felt like I was actually shining. The photographer showed me a few of the shots, and I was amazed. I didn't just look like someone trying to be a model. I looked confident. I looked like someone who belonged in front of the camera. That shoot was a turning point for me. I realized that modeling wasn't about being perfect or fitting some idealized image of beauty. It was about confidence, about being comfortable with who you are. The more I embraced myself, my quirks, my imperfections, the better I felt in front of the camera. I wasn't trying to hide behind a persona anymore. I was just being me. And that was enough. After that job, things started to move faster. I got more bookings, and with each one, my confidence grew. I learned that it wasn't about looking like the girls I saw in magazines. It was about owning my own uniqueness. I wasn't the ugly girl anymore. I was becoming someone different. Someone who could stand tall, look people in the eye, and be proud of who she was. I also learned how important it was to take care of myself. In the past, I'd been so focused on hiding my flaws that I didn't pay attention to the little things. Now I took time to eat better, get enough sleep, and exercise. Not because I wanted to change my appearance, but because I wanted to feel strong and healthy. I realized that self-care wasn't just about looking good. It was about feeling good too. The more I worked, the more I met other people in the industry. I connected with other models, photographers, and makeup artists who shared their own stories. I heard about their struggles and triumphs, and I realized that no one had it easy. Everyone, no matter how beautiful or successful, had their own doubts and fears. That made me feel less alone. It reminded me that confidence wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built over time, through experience and support. One day, after a long day of shooting, I sat in my car and thought about how far I had come. Just a year ago, I never would have imagined that this would be my life. I had gone from being the shy, ugly girl in high school to someone who was slowly, but surely, carving out a place for herself in the modeling world. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't have it all figured out, but I was proud of how far I'd come. It wasn't an easy journey, and I knew there were still challenges ahead. But I had learned something important. Confidence isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's about accepting who you are and believing that you have something valuable to offer, just as you are. And that was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. As time went on, things began to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. My modeling career was moving forward, step by step. I had made some connections, gained a little experience, and booked more jobs. But despite my progress, there was still a part of me that couldn't believe how far I had come. I still had moments of doubt, moments when I felt like an imposter in the world I was starting to be a part of. But then, out of nowhere, came the phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning when my agent called. I had just finished a small shoot for a local boutique, feeling a little worn out but proud of the work I had done. When I saw her name on my phone, I picked it up, expecting to talk about upcoming gigs. Instead, she immediately got to the point. "We've got something big for you," she said, her voice full of excitement. "There's a major campaign, and they want you." My heart stopped. A major campaign. I could hardly believe it. Was she talking to the right person? Me? I had been working hard, yes, but this felt like something out of my reach. "Are you sure?" I asked, still trying to process what she was saying. "I'm sure," she said, laughing a little. "It's all set up. They saw your portfolio and are interested. You're going to do a test shoot for them tomorrow. It's a huge opportunity." I was speechless. This was the kind of thing I had dreamed of, but never thought would actually happen. A major campaign. This was the break I had been waiting for, but I couldn't help but feel nervous. What if I messed up? What if I wasn't good enough? I was still that shy girl at heart, the one who had never been picked for anything special. But now, here I was, with an opportunity that could change my life. The next day, I arrived at the studio early. I was nervous, but I did my best to hide it. I was determined to make a good impression. When I walked into the studio, the energy was electric. People were rushing around, preparing for the shoot. I saw other models, all of them tall and beautiful, their faces confident and full of energy. I felt a little out of place, but I reminded myself that I had earned this spot. The photographer was kind, explaining the setup and helping me feel comfortable. "Just relax and let's have fun with this," he said, as if he could sense my nerves. I nodded, taking a deep breath. This was my moment. I wasn't going to let fear hold me back. The shoot began, and I did my best to stay focused. The first few shots felt shaky, but as the session went on, I started to relax. The team guided me, giving me directions and encouraging me to try different poses. With each click of the camera, I started to feel more in control. For the first time, I wasn't trying to hide behind a persona. I was just being me, and that felt good. After a few hours, the shoot was over. I was exhausted, but also exhilarated. The energy in the room was different now. The team seemed pleased with the photos, and the photographer even mentioned how natural I looked in front of the camera. For the first time, I felt like I was truly doing something that mattered. This was the big break I had been waiting for, and I had given it my all. A week later, my agent called again. This time, the news was even bigger. The campaign had been a success. The client loved the photos, and they wanted me to be the face of their next big project. I could hardly believe it. It was happening. I was going to be in a real campaign, working with people who were professionals in the industry. This was the moment that would set everything in motion. As I hung up the phone, I sat there for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. I had made it this far. From the girl who was always told she wasn't good enough to the girl who was now going to be the face of a major campaign. It felt unreal, but I was ready for whatever came next. This was my time, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I was strong enough to face them. The days that followed were a blur of excitement and hard work. The campaign I had dreamed of was now a reality, and I was stepping into a world I had never imagined. My face was appearing in magazines, online ads, and billboards. I couldn't believe it. It was like I was living in someone else's life, someone much braver and more confident than the girl I used to be. As the campaign took off, I found myself facing new challenges. It wasn't just about the excitement of being in front of the camera anymore. Now I had to learn how to handle the attention, the expectations, and the pressures that came with being a model. There were long days on set, constant critiques from photographers and stylists, and a never-ending push to look perfect. It was harder than I thought. At first, I struggled with the pressure to look a certain way, to always be on and polished. Sometimes, I felt like I was losing myself in all of it. I had to remind myself that the girl in the magazines wasn't the full picture. She was just one version of me, captured in a moment, but not the complete story. I had to learn to balance my new career with staying true to who I was. One day, after a particularly tough shoot, I sat in my dressing room, feeling drained. I looked in the mirror and thought about how much I had changed. I wasn't the shy, awkward girl from high school anymore, but I wasn't entirely sure who this new version of me was either. I was still learning to navigate the world of modeling, and it felt overwhelming at times. But then I remembered something important. This journey was mine. I had worked hard to get here, and I had overcome so much along the way. I had faced rejection, doubt, and fear, and yet, here I was, living a life I had once only dreamed of. That was something to be proud of. The road had been long and difficult, but each step had brought me closer to the person I was becoming. Soon, I realized that the most important thing wasn't how many photos I had taken or how many campaigns I had been a part of. It was about the confidence I had built in myself. It was about finally accepting that I was enough, just as I was. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being authentic, being true to myself, and not letting anyone else define who I was. Over time, I began to speak out more. I used my platform to encourage others who felt like they didn't belong, to remind them that they were worthy, no matter what society told them. I shared my story with others, how I went from being the ugly girl in high school to becoming a supermodel, and how that transformation was about more than just physical change. It was about accepting my flaws, embracing my uniqueness, and learning to love myself. I also started connecting with other models, some of whom had faced similar struggles. We supported each other, shared advice, and helped each other grow. The industry was tough, but with the right people around me, I knew I could handle it. As my career continued to grow, I didn't just see myself as a model. I saw myself as someone who had found her voice, someone who had learned that beauty comes in all forms. I was more than just the girl in front of the camera. I was a woman who had fought for her place in the world and had finally found the strength to stand tall. Looking back on everything I had been through, I realized something. The journey was never just about becoming a supermodel. It was about becoming the best version of myself, learning to embrace my worth, and understanding that my story mattered. I had found the courage to take control of my own narrative, and that was the greatest transformation of all.